My name is Ellis Morgan, and this is the story of how they handed my sister a mansion with a bow on it and gave me a rusted key with a smirk. For years, I stayed quiet. I watched them raise glasses to Sloane's success, pose for magazine covers, cut ribbons in front of gates that were supposed to be mine. I stood at the edge of their celebrations, forgotten, erased, rewritten out of a story that once had my name in the first line. But what they didn't know, while they were busy counting cameras and champagne flutes, I was counting deeds, saving receipts, gathering every quiet piece of truth they tried to bury under crystal chandeliers and polished smiles. I didn't want revenge. I wanted what was mine. And when I stood in front of City Hall, holding my mother's handwriting, holding legal proof, holding their lies up to the light, I realized something. They built an empire on broken promises. I built my home on the truth. And when the time came, I didn't knock on their door. I kicked it open, with documents. If you've ever been handed less, if you've ever been told to smile and accept your share, if you've ever walked away from a table that was never set for you, then this story is for you. The crowd cheered as Thomas Harper cut the crimson ribbon across the wrought iron gates. Sloane stood beside him, radiant in a champagne dress, one hand elegantly perched on his arm, the other lifted in a regal wave toward the camera flashes. The mansion loomed behind them, 3 stories of pristine glass and stone, manicured hedges curving like sculptures around the marble driveway. I stood at the edge of the crowd, my heels sinking slightly into the lawn, a paper envelope clutched in my hand like a punishment. It was the same lawn where Sloane and I once ran barefoot as girls, chasing dragonflies and dreams. I used to whisper to the sky that one day I'd build a house here. Not just any house, a home. Walls full of music and laughter, a porch swing for quiet mornings. I used to draw it in my notebooks, sketching windows with wildflowers and big bay doors that would open to a life better than the one we had. But now Sloane had it. Marble, chandeliers, security gates, and a swimming pool shaped like a crescent moon. And me? Dad, Thomas, cleared his throat and turned toward the crowd, his voice amplified by a small podium mic. And now, he said, eyes scanning until they landed on me, a gift from my other daughter. The pause that followed was so heavy I felt the oxygen shift. He held up a small brass key. Ellis, this is for you. People turned to look. I walked forward slowly, trying to keep my spine tall as I took the key from his hand. It was cold. It didn't shine. It was old, tarnished around the teeth, the ring loop bent slightly as if it had been yanked off something. Your mother's cabin? Thomas added, as if that clarified it. Still on family land. Yours now. No applause. Not even polite. I forced a smile. Thank you. Sloane leaned toward me as we posed for a quick photo the photographer insisted on. At least it's still standing? Mostly, she whispered, her lips curling just enough to show how much she enjoyed the moment. I blinked slowly. Still standing, I repeated, pocketing the key. I left before dessert. The cabin was a 20-minute drive down a gravel path that hadn't seen maintenance in years. Branches scratched the sides of my car like they were trying to hold me back. When I parked in front of the small, sagging structure, silence swallowed everything. The roof dipped like a tired back. One shutter hung by a single hinge. The front steps were green with moss, and the porch groaned when I stepped on it. A fat spider skittered out from a broken beam. I remembered coming here as a child. My mother, real, gentle, with cinnamon-sweet skin and hummingbird eyes, used to braid my hair on that porch. We'd sit on the swing and talk about nothing and everything. She had dreams too. She wanted to turn the place into a writing retreat, or a flower shop, or maybe just a haven where we could breathe. Thomas said he'd rebuild it for her one day. The house will be yours, he once told me, patting my head like that made it true. I put the key in the lock. It stuck at first, but with a little pressure, it turned. The door creaked open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and something darker. Mildew clung to the walls. The floor sagged under my weight. Bits of plaster curled off the ceiling like dead skin. I walked slowly, swallowing my revulsion, and then I saw it. In the corner of what used to be the living room stood a wooden chair, the same one I used to sit on to read while Mom made tea. The name Ellis was carved into the backrest, childish and uneven, but unmistakable. My name. I brushed my fingers over it, and for a moment I wasn't 38. I was 8, barefoot and beaming, showing my mom how I'd carved it with her old sewing needle. It should have been destroyed. It should have rotted. But it hadn't. I sat down. The wood creaked but held. Then I looked around. Not at the rot or the peeling paint, but at the beams, the bones, the way the late sun still poured through the cracks like hope sneaking in. Maybe this wasn't an ending, but as I stepped onto that rotting porch, something shifted inside me. I wasn't going to accept this. If that dinner had a name, it'd be the exhibit of my failure. The chandelier above was a monstrous bloom of crystal and light, refracting gold across a table set for 12, though only 8 chairs were occupied. I was placed at the far end, next to a powder room whose door squeaked every time someone emerged smelling like lilacs and entitlement. The silverware gleamed like museum artifacts. A harpist played softly in the next room. The dining room's marble floor, imported from somewhere absurdly expensive, reflected every flicker of firelight from the grand stone hearth. I sat with my back straight, heels tucked tight beneath me, pretending the chair didn't wobble slightly. The cushion was thinner than the others. Of course. Across the table, Sloane laughed, her wrist grazing Jason's as she reached for her wineglass. He chuckled, though his eyes didn't meet hers. Or mine. He hadn't looked at me since I arrived. He had changed. His beard was trimmed shorter, his suit perfectly tailored. But I could still see the way his brow furrowed before a difficult conversation. I used to kiss that wrinkle. Martha's voice sliced through the harp music. "Ellis, dear," she purred, "are you still working at that nonprofit?" The pause before nonprofit was surgical. "I am," I replied evenly, lifting my water. "We just secured a grant for veterans housing in Arapahoe County." She murmured, her smile tightening. "Such noble work. Though I do wonder how sustainable it is. I mean, emotionally." I didn't respond. Thomas was already raising his glass. "To the legacy of Harper," he announced, his voice rich with pride. "Built by visionaries, led by Sloane." The guests nodded. Some clapped politely. I sipped my water. Jason shifted. His gaze flicked toward me for a moment before darting away. "You used to dream of this spot, remember, Ellis?" he said suddenly. His voice was soft, almost nostalgic. The clinking of forks stopped. A beat of silence. Then, laughter. Thin, awkward laughter, like someone had told a joke that wasn't quite funny, but they were all too polite to let it die. I smiled at my plate. I remembered. We used to sneak onto the property during our junior year at CU Boulder. He'd tease me about building a house with secret passageways and a rooftop garden. I'd tell him where I'd put the fireplace. We'd sit on the old swing outside the cabin and dream things bigger than either of us. Then he stopped calling. Then I learned Martha had written a letter. Official Harper stationery. Politely informing him that our family expects alliances that reflect our values. He never mentioned it, and I never begged. I looked around the table now. Thomas swirling his scotch like it was a medal. Martha dabbing at imaginary crumbs. Sloane playing the perfect hostess, dimples and all. Jason with his hands under the table, gripping something too tightly. I looked at them all, and for the first time in years, I stopped caring if they liked me. The shed wasn't just falling apart, it was decaying, like the lie they fed me my whole life. I stepped over the warped threshold with a broom in one hand and a flashlight in the other. The bulb flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the splintered floorboards. Cold wind threaded through gaps in the walls, tugging at the hem of my sweater. Something rustled in the rafters, probably a raccoon, maybe a ghost. The air smelled of mildew, dust, and something older, like secrets. I coughed, then set to work. Each sweep of the broom lifted a veil of dust, revealing the bones of what once was, or was supposed to be. In one corner, a collapsed cot leaned drunkenly against the wall, a rusted bucket, broken shelves. Underneath a loose floorboard near the hearth, I found it, a faded photograph. My mother sitting on a tree stump holding a child, me. Her smile was soft, radiant. Tucked behind the photo was a folded page yellowed with time, a drawing done in pencil and crayon, a house. Not a mansion, something cozy with a porch swing, wide windows, and a garden. Written in loopy script at the top, for Ellis. One day, we'll build it together. My knees buckled and I sat on the cold floor, the drawing trembling in my hands. I hadn't thought of her in years. Not like this. Not with that smell of lavender from her scarves, or the way she used to hum while brushing my hair. After she died, Thomas married Martha within a year. The old cabin was locked. I wasn't allowed to go inside again. Now I understood why. A knock on the broken frame jolted me. I turned to find a hunched figure silhouetted against the moonlight. "Mrs. Avery?" I asked, rising slowly. She stepped closer, clutching a wool shawl. Her eyes were sharp behind thick glasses. "I saw your car. Thought I'd bring some tea, but you look like you need something stronger." I managed a small laugh. "Tea's perfect." She handed me a thermos, then glanced at the photograph in my hand. Her expression softened. "She loved that spot," Mrs. Avery said, voice low. "Said it was your future. She'd sit here with you and talk about that house for hours." "I didn't know she left anything behind." "Thomas didn't want you to." She leaned against the doorframe, sighing. "Your mother inherited this land from her grandfather. She wanted you to have it when you turned 18. I froze. "But the papers?" "He changed them. Legally, perhaps. Morally." She shook her head. "He waited until she passed. Claimed it as marital property. Quietly reassigned everything. Your mother wrote a letter before the cancer got bad. I still have it. Thought you'd want it now?" My hands trembled again, but this time with a different kind of energy. Not grief. Resolve. I took the thermos, thanked her, and watched her walk back through the darkness. The wind had quieted, but something in me had started to stir. Inside, I opened my laptop. The battery was low, but it would last long enough. Inheritance law, property reclamation, Colorado statute of limitations, revocable trusts. My fingers flew across the keyboard. They gave me a ruin. I'll give them a reckoning. My revenge wouldn't be loud. It would be legal, beautiful, and unstoppable. The jazz from the speakers above was low, all brushed snares and upright bass, filling the quiet in a way that felt intentional. Outside the window, leaves rustled down the sidewalk like burnt orange confetti. I stirred my coffee twice, though I wasn't cold. The bell above the cafe door jingled. Nate Coleman walked in with the same careful stride I remembered from college, like he was always listening, even to things unsaid. He hadn't changed much. Still wore denim jackets in fall. Still had that thoughtful wrinkle between his brows that deepened when he was concentrating. He spotted me and smiled. "Ellis Harper? Or do you go by something else these days?" "Just Ellis," I said, rising. We hugged, brief, familiar. Then we sat. I didn't waste time. I slid the sketch across the table, my mother's drawing, redrawn and revised. Porch swing, wide windows, garden. Nate studied it in silence. You drew this? He asked finally. Traced it from something my mom left behind, I replied. Then I added a few tweaks. Solar panels, expanded kitchen, storage in back. He looked up. This is good. Really good. I want to build it where the shed is, I said, watching his reaction. His brow lifted. That spot's barely standing. Exactly. We'd tear it down. Start fresh. Start house. He blinked. That what you're calling it? I nodded. It's not just for me. It's a concept. A place where someone who's lost everything can begin again. Nate leaned back. You know, your dad rejected this kind of idea a decade ago. Community rebuilding, affordable green housing, called it idealistic fluff. His mouth curved. And now he's unknowingly handed you the exact plot to prove him wrong. I smiled. Ironic. We spoke for nearly an hour. Materials, logistics, permits. I told him I wanted to file everything under Ellis Morgan, my birth mother's name. No Harper signatures, no traceable funding lines. Just me, working from nothing. When I asked about permits, Nate gave me the name of a city official. Someone quiet, fair, not easily swayed by local politics. I met the man 2 days later in a dusty municipal office with peeling walls and humming fluorescent lights. We reviewed property lines and zoning codes. No red flags, no denials. Approval would take 6 to 8 weeks. I could work on the surveying in the meantime. Back at the cabin, I marked the corners of the new foundation with orange flags. The grass crunched beneath my boots. I measured the base of the old structure, then paced out the width of the new one. My fingers were freezing. I didn't care. Nate joined me that weekend with his gear, a clipboard, measuring tape, and one of those laser-level gadgets that made him look like a science fiction carpenter. He crouched beside the sagging shed, tapping one of the rotting beams. Your father tried to kill this kind of dream once, he said quietly. Now he's handed you the ground to build it. I didn't answer right away. The wind stirred the leaves in a whisper behind us. I looked up at the open sky, then down at the soil beneath my feet. I wasn't rebuilding the shed. I was resurrecting my mother's promise. Every brick I laid whispered, not for them, for me. The air was sharp, crisp with the bite of early winter. My breath came in visible puffs as I stood before what was left of the shed, or rather, what had been. Now only a few timber ribs remained, like a skeleton barely clinging to form. Nate adjusted his gloves beside me, nodding once before raising the sledgehammer. The first blow cracked through the silence like a thunderclap. Dust flew. Wood splintered. The past trembled. We worked in steady rhythm. Swing, fall, clear. A few hours later, the walls were down. The roof sagged in and collapsed, defeated. It felt symbolic, like a bad chapter finally ripped from a book. A couple of volunteers arrived by noon, bundled in beanies and puffer jackets. They were men and women I had met through my nonprofit work. Veterans, single moms, a teacher who'd once lived in a shelter we helped fund. They didn't ask questions, just smiled, rolled up sleeves, and joined in. Concrete was poured, nails driven. Someone brought donuts and lukewarm cider. I didn't mind the cold anymore. Near the center of the cleared site, I placed a small frame in the dirt. Inside was a photo, my mother kneeling, arms wrapped around a tiny version of me, the field behind us still wild and empty. It would sit there while we built. A reminder, a compass. By mid-afternoon, my muscles ached, but in a way that grounded me. There was something pure about the labor. something that stitched the broken parts of me back together without a word. Then I heard it. Click, click, click. Heels. I turned before she called my name. Sloane stood at the edge of the property, draped in camel wool and dark sunglasses. She looked like she'd stepped off the pages of an ad for Aspen Winter Chic. Her lip curled as she surveyed the site. "So this is your kingdom?" she said, voice sugar-laced and bitter underneath. I dusted off my gloves and walked toward her, slowly. The mud didn't bother me. The chill didn't reach me. I looked her straight in the eye. "No," I said. "This is where I stop kneeling." She flinched. Barely. But I saw it. A flicker, like her brain registering something that didn't fit her script. I wondered if Jason had told her about my visit to the planning office, if Thomas knew a legal name other than Harper had applied for the permit. "You always loved your little causes," she muttered. "Playhouses for broken people." "And yet," I said softly, "I seem to be the only one building something that lasts." For a moment her face almost softened, but it didn't hold. She turned sharply, walking away without another word. She left, heels clicking. But the ground was shifting beneath her. To build something new, I had to unearth everything they buried. The city library's basement didn't smell like knowledge. It smelled like mildew and cardboard. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I descended the creaking stairs, hugging my coat tighter. I hadn't been here since college. Back then, I came for research papers. Now, I was digging through the ruins of a life Mrs. Avery had called the night before. "Your papers weren't burned," she'd said. "They're just hidden, like you were." She'd given me a list. Record boxes, dates, names, things most people wouldn't remember. But she did. And that was enough. A clerk with a lanyard and coffee-stained teeth led me to a steel shelving unit at the far end of the basement. I signed a form and he left. Dust rose as I opened the first box, then the second. Hours blurred as I sifted through brittle contracts, old water bills, zoning charts. Then I found it. A yellowed folder labeled Morgan, D. Inside, a property deed, dated 3 years before my birth. It listed my mother, Diane Morgan, as sole inheritor of a 2-acre parcel on the edge of what was now the Harper estate. No mention of Thomas, no Harper signatures. My hands trembled. I scanned it 3 times to be sure, then slipped it into my folder and packed up for the next stop. Mrs. Avery's warehouse was colder than the library. The insulation was half done, the floor sagged in places. But she had kept everything. Letters, photos, even a few of my childhood drawings. We sat on an overturned crate, the heater wheezing in protest nearby. "I wasn't sure if this would matter one day," she murmured, handing me a leather-bound book. But it always felt like someday it would. It was my mother's diary. The first few pages were filled with soft entries, garden notes, recipes, bedtime stories. But halfway through, the tone changed. Abrupt, clearer, painful. He promised me we'd build it here, said it'd be hers, Ellis's. But something changed after the wedding. Papers disappeared. He said they were being merged. Then, taped to one page, a hand-drawn house, familiar lines, just like the dream sketch. But this one had a stamp, notarized, signed Diane Morgan. Below it, 3 words in fading ink: Ellis's place. Promise kept. I couldn't breathe for a second. Back at home, I scanned every document and emailed them to a property attorney I trusted from a previous nonprofit project. I didn't explain much, just asked her to confirm legality and potential standing. The response came 2 days later. "If verified in court, this constitutes potential inheritance fraud. The land was never legally transferred. You may have a case." I stared at the screen. My chest felt hollow and heavy all at once. They built her a mansion on stolen land. Time to charge the rent. I didn't say a word. I just let the walls speak for me. Sunlight draped the frame of the start house in golden angles, catching dust motes in the air like floating stars. We had made it to the second story now. The smell of fresh timber mingled with the sharp tang of insulation foam, and every nail I drove felt like another line in a sentence I'd waited decades to say. Nate stood beside me, sleeves rolled up, clipboard in hand, but mostly just smiling. The site was buzzing. Volunteers measuring, sawing, climbing ladders. You'd think we were building a cathedral, the way people moved with reverence. And then, the camera showed up. She was barely 5 feet tall, a hoodie draped over a high ponytail, with a tripod in one hand and a lapel mic in the other. I recognized her from online. Layla, a vlogger known for raw, heart-centered stories around Denver. No filters, no fakery. "Hi," she said, stepping up to me with a grin. "I heard you're building more than just a house." I wiped my hands on my jeans. "Just making something useful." "Mind if I film?" I hesitated, then nodded. "As long as no one's mocked for trying." Layla filmed the volunteers, the foundation blueprints, and the photo of me and my mother that we'd now posted on a beam near the entry. She asked simple questions. Why this place? Who's it for? What's the story? I didn't answer most of them. I just kept hammering. Behind us, someone whispered, "That mansion up the hill is fancy, sure. But this?" She gestured toward our exposed beams and cinder blocks. "This one has a heart." Layla caught it on mic. She stayed for hours. The video went live that night. By morning, it had over 100,000 views. The title? She built her dignity from ruins. Comments poured in. She turned a broken shed into a sanctuary. Who needs chandeliers when you've got soul? That's the kind of home I'd want to walk into. I didn't repost it. I didn't like or comment. I just kept working, but I knew someone was watching. Midweek, I caught sight of Sloane standing across the road, her designer coat wrapped tight, arms folded, sunglasses on despite the shade. She didn't speak, just stared, the way people do when something challenges everything they've been taught to worship. She left without a word. That night, my phone rang, a number I hadn't seen in 4 months. I let it buzz twice before answering. "Ellis?" My father's voice rasped. "Stop this nonsense." I stayed quiet, let the silence grow teeth. He used to ignore me. Now he was dialing me. That's progress. They thought I'd play nice. But I brought blueprints and fire. The fluorescent lights of City Hall flickered above me, humming like a nervous chorus. It wasn't the grand courtroom people imagined when they thought of justice. It was a multi-purpose room with folding chairs, beige walls, and a coffee station that hadn't been cleaned since the Reagan administration. But today, it would do. I adjusted the binder in my hands. The city representative, a man in his 50s with the air of someone who'd seen too many zoning disputes, cleared his throat. "Ms. Harper." "Ellis," I corrected calmly. "I go by Morgan now. As in Diane Morgan, the woman who legally inherited the land this council is standing on." Murmurs rippled through the small crowd. My voice didn't shake. I stepped forward, placed 3 copies of the original land deed on the table. The notary stamp glinted under the overhead light like a challenge. "This is not a protest. It's a petition for reclassification of the parcel at Ridgeview and Harper Lane, currently listed under an invalid transfer," I said. "I'm requesting official recognition of the Start House project as a humanitarian, nonprofit development under city code." The room stilled. A young reporter scribbled furiously in the back corner. I recognized her. Marla James, independent but sharp, known for digging where legacy names didn't want shovels. "Ms. Morgan," she called, standing. "Some would say this is retaliatory." After your family's recent redistributions. I met her gaze evenly. Number. It's a reclamation. Of dignity. Of what was stolen. Of what should have never been silenced in the first place. Across the room, a man in a navy blazer shifted. He wore a cap low over his face, but the set of his shoulders was unmistakable. Thomas. He hadn't shown his face in 4 months, but he was here, watching, assessing, trying to stay invisible in a room where the spotlight no longer bent to him. When the city rep asked for the Harpers to produce updated zoning permissions and ownership papers, I stepped aside. My binder was already open on the table. Original deed. Morgan, not Harper. Stamped, notarized, legally binding. They stalled. We'll need time to respond. The rep nodded. We'll schedule a follow-up in 2 weeks. By then, you'll need to show clear proof of legal transfer from Diane Morgan to the Harper estate. They didn't have it. Because it never existed. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering the last brittle leaves of fall across the city hall steps. I paused at the top, breathing it in, the cold, the tension, the shift in momentum. Inside that room, for the first time in years, it wasn't me under scrutiny anymore. It was them. They fought back, of course, with lies dressed in tuxedos. The segment aired at 6:03 p.m. on Channel 12. Thomas was seated across from a local anchor, dressed in a navy suit, hands folded with the calm grace of a man who'd rehearsed remorse in front of a mirror. I love both my daughters, he said, his voice thick with paternal performance. But Ellis has been struggling for years. It breaks my heart to see her twist grief into vendettas. The anchor nodded, solemn. She claims the land was hers by maternal inheritance? Thomas smiled, small, patronizing. She was 10 when her mother passed. We gave her every opportunity. But when someone refuses help, well, what can you do? Then came the op-ed. Sloan had posted it minutes after the segment aired. The House of Delusion, a family's silent suffering. It accused me of paranoia, reclusive behaviors, and implied I had been diagnosed with something I'd never even been tested for. Attached was a blurry photo of me from years ago, post-breakup, bags under my eyes, hoodie on. The caption, unwell, unfit, unhinged. And then my phone buzzed. Jason, you don't deserve this. I'm sorry. I stared at the message, blinking hard. The same man who stood silent at the dinner table, who let Sloan slip her claws into him without protest, now had the gall to apologize by text. I didn't respond, didn't scream, didn't throw the phone. I just slid down the wall in my tiny apartment, knees pressed to my chest, and cried. It wasn't the media lies. I could fight lies. It was the feeling of being 10 again, watching the world twist around me like I was invisible, inconvenient, unnecessary. I hadn't cried since my mother's funeral. Until now. The knock came gently. I wiped my face, opened the door. Nate stood there. No clipboard, no plans, just steady eyes and a paper bag. Brought soup, he said. And truth, if you're low on that too. I didn't speak. Just let him in. He placed the bag on the counter, then sat beside me on the floor. Let me guess, he murmured. They're spinning gold out of garbage. I gave a hollow laugh. It's working. He leaned back. Only if you stop building. I looked at him. You're putting up beams that'll outlast noise. Noise can't frame a door. It can't shelter anyone. But you? He paused. You're doing something permanent. And in that quiet, something in me cracked. Not out of weakness, but like armor finally bending into shape. Because if they wanted a battle, I'd give them a damn war. Her handwriting was shaky, but the words struck like steel. The attic smelled of cedar and forgotten grief. Rain tapped the roof above me like a soft but urgent reminder. I'd been too afraid to open this letter for years. folded in wax paper, kept inside an old quilt sewn by my mother. It had survived time, mold, and silence. Now it would break all three. My dearest Ellis, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it to see the house we dreamed of. But you must know, it was always meant to be yours. I fought for it. I bled for it. And I never stopped believing in what you'd become. Don't let them carve your worth into their name. You carry mine. You carry me. I gave you life. Don't let them take your spirit. Tears blurred the ink, but her words burned through me. The kind of burn that cauterizes, not destroys. The next morning, I walked into the law office with that letter and a notarized copy of the land deed. My attorney, Ms. Ramirez, barely blinked. We have enough to file a fraud complaint, estate manipulation, and unlawful zoning transfer. It won't be pretty, but it'll be loud. Good, I said. Let it echo. We filed the suit. 24 pages long, names spelled in capital letters. Thomas Harper, Sloan Harper, the Harper Estate, LLC. Attached was a transcript of my mother's letter, filed as supplementary testamentary evidence. Ms. Ramirez uploaded the entire case to a public legal archive. The site crashed within 2 hours. But not before the vlogger I'd met, Eli James, picked it up. His voice filled the TikTok clip that hit 2 million views by nightfall. This is the story of Ellis Harper. From forgotten shed to courtroom storm. From silence to justice. He showed the blueprints, the volunteers, the old photograph of my mother holding a baby girl in front of a field. Then my voice, from a community meeting. This isn't retaliation. It's reclamation. The video ended on the word justice in bold white letters. I was in bed staring at the ceiling when the call came in. Sloan. Her voice was sharp, acidic, trembling under the weight of a new fear. What are you trying to do to us? I waited. Let the silence land. Then I answered. Just what you did to me. But this time, with receipts. They thought they could silence me. I brought a microphone instead. The conference room inside City Hall was packed beyond its fire code limits. Rows of folding chairs crammed together, cameras perched on tripods, reporters whispering into handheld mics. Above the podium, the city's crest gleamed against a backdrop of burgundy velvet. Beneath it, a long council table stood like a judge's bench waiting for testimony, just not mine. At least, not until today. Thomas took the floor first. His suit was pressed, his voice smooth, his words rehearsed like a man used to holding power with only his tone. We understand the allegations, but they are a result of miscommunication, not malice, he said with a small chuckle. Ellis left the estate willingly. The cabin was our attempt at reconciliation. Murmurs. He glanced toward the crowd like a beloved teacher betrayed by a misbehaving pupil. She had every chance to join the family business, but she chose another path. We respected that. I waited until the chairwoman gestured to me. Then I stood. I wasn't wearing power. I wasn't dripping with money or clout. But I had something no mansion could buy. I laid the folder flat on the table. My voice didn't waver. This, I said, holding up the aged contract, is the original land deed, signed by my mother before she died. It shows the plot where the mansion now stands was bequeathed to me. Gasps rippled. I opened the second page, slowly. And this, I continued, unfolding the letter, is her final statement. Her voice. I didn't read the whole thing, just one line. Don't let them take your spirit. Someone in the back of the room clapped, another followed. Then silence. I turned to Thomas. You said I left, I said evenly. But if I was never meant to be here, why does her signature say otherwise? The council president leaned forward, fingers laced. We've reviewed the documents, she said. The evidence suggests significant discrepancies in the property transfer records. Thomas's jaw tightened. Sloane looked down at her phone, pretending not to exist. The president nodded to the clerk. The panel will now vote whether to open an ethics investigation into the Harper estate. And in that moment, I wasn't the forgotten daughter with a rusted key anymore. I was the one holding the blueprint, the one with the microphone. All empires crumble from within. I just gave gravity a push. The Harper estate looked different in the dark. Not grand, not imposing, just empty. The same way it always felt to me when I stood inside it. Like a stage set built for someone else's play. The fountain out front was off for the winter, and the marble lions that flanked the stairs had icicles hanging from their mouths like broken teeth. I parked 3 blocks away and walked the rest. This wasn't a night for dramatic entrances. This was surgical. Aunt Camille opened the side door before I could knock. Her face hadn't changed much. Sharp cheekbones, elegant posture, but softer now, like time had turned judgment into something closer to regret. She didn't smile. "Come in quickly." The interior smelled of lavender and old paper. We didn't sit in the main hall or the lounge or anywhere the portraits of the Harper men still glared from their frames. Instead, she led me to a narrow den behind the pantry, locked the door, and pulled a shoebox from beneath a false drawer in the built-in shelves. "You should have had this a long time ago," she said, setting the box between us. Inside were 3 things: a crumpled envelope addressed to my mother, a medical prescription dated 2 days before the property transfer, and the original deed, unsigned. My fingers trembled. "He sedated her?" I asked, my voice raw. Camille nodded slowly. "He told the notary she had insomnia, said it was just to calm her down. But she didn't know what she was signing. I watched it happen." "Why didn't you stop it?" Her eyes welled. "Because I was afraid. But you aren't. And I can't be silent anymore." I folded the documents carefully, like something holy. Because they were. Outside, footsteps scraped against the stone. Camille's eyes darted to the hallway. "You need to go. Now." I reached the main corridor just as Sloane stepped out of the shadows, wrapped in a fur coat like a villain auditioning for a soap opera. "You think digging up ghost stories makes you brave?" she hissed. "Trash knows how to demand justice now?" I stepped past her, calm and deliberate. "Trash can build a roof," I said. "You're just living in a fantasy." Her expression cracked for the briefest second, but I didn't stay to watch it crumble. I walked out into the cold, the original deed pressed to my chest like armor. Tomorrow, I'm taking this to court. Their silence in court was louder than any denial. The courtroom smelled of paper and nerves. Light filtered through the tall windows like a spotlight meant for reckoning. I sat at the plaintiff's table in a gray suit I borrowed from a friend, stiff at the shoulders, but clean. Appropriate. Necessary. Across from me, Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His tie was slightly off-center, his hair a shade too dark for his age. Sloane sat beside him, all gloss and poise, but her foot tapped beneath the table. Jason was there too, behind them. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The clerk read the docket. Civil Case 24-3759. Plaintiff, Ellis Harper. Defendant, Thomas Harper, the Harper family estate. My attorney stood and handed over a folder. Inside were the original deed, notarized statements, and a certified letter my mother wrote in 2003. None of it screamed. But it didn't have to. It was quiet power. The kind built word by word over years of being dismissed. The property in question was deeded under contested circumstances, my attorney said. The documents presented today raise substantial doubts about the legitimacy of the transfer. We are requesting an injunction and a full investigation into fraudulent conveyance. The room shifted. Quiet gasps, pen clicks. The judge adjusted her glasses. Thomas didn't speak. He simply stared at the table in front of him, as if trying to read a version of reality where this wasn't happening. Sloane leaned over and whispered something, but he didn't respond. Then came the transcript. Not of trauma, but of promises. A promise he made to my mother in a handwritten note. A promise to build her a house, to give her space, to give me a future. He'd broken every part of it. The judge looked down. Based on the evidence submitted today, I am ordering a temporary freeze on the Harper estate assets pending further review. The court will reconvene in 30 days. Thomas stood suddenly, too fast. His face paled and he staggered back. A commotion followed, murmurs, rustling coats, someone calling for paramedics. He slumped onto the bench behind him, one hand clutching the side of the table, the other shaking. The judge called a recess. Everyone stood. I stayed seated, calm, still, watching him. Not with hatred, just with clarity. Jason turned to me as they wheeled Thomas out. His lips moved. Maybe I'm sorry, but I didn't acknowledge it. I had no more space for ghosts. I turned to the court clerk, nodded once, and gathered my documents into a neat stack. We're not done yet, Dad. This is just the beginning. The house I was never allowed in now echoed with apologies. The Harper mansion had never looked this small. Its towering windows, once so smug and sparkling, were clouded now. Half the lights were out. The driveway was empty except for a single black car. No staff, no gardeners, no curated bouquets flanking the entrance. Silence stretched across the walls like a tight sheet, ready to tear. I stepped inside without knocking. Nobody stopped me. The foyer felt colder than the air outside. Dust traced the edges of the wainscoting. Somewhere down the hall, a clock ticked loudly, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Sloane stood at the bottom of the staircase, wrapped in a beige coat far too thin for early winter. Her arms were crossed, but not in defiance, more like she was holding herself together. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. You got what you wanted, she said quietly, her voice cracking. Stop. I've done enough. I met her eyes for the first time in weeks. I haven't done anything, I replied. I just stopped being patient. Behind me, the soft shutter click of a camera echoed. A reporter stood by the open door, nodding at Camille, who'd let him in. She gave no expression, just a tired kind of approval. Sloane flinched at the sound. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Yes, you did, I said, steady. You just thought no one would call it out. I walked past her toward the study. My mother's name was still engraved on a small leather folder shoved to the back of the shelf. I took it. In the sitting room, a tiny porcelain figure, mine, still sat on the window ledge, one arm chipped off. I pocketed it too. I didn't need vengeance, just my pieces. Camille appeared by the hallway with something in her hands. A canvas, yellowed at the corners, paint gently cracking. A house sketched in warm strokes, soft hills behind it. A child and a woman standing in front of it, faces incomplete but unmistakable. She painted this right after you were born, Camille said. She called it Homecoming. At the bottom, in faint pencil, were the words, Home is where you're not afraid. I took it carefully. My throat tightened, but no tears came. Thank you, I whispered. Sloane said nothing. She didn't move. As I stepped out into the cold, the wind bit at my cheeks, but I didn't flinch. The mansion loomed behind me, gutted and pale. It wasn't a home anymore. It was an empty box I'd finally stepped out of. Justice didn't come with applause, but it came. Finally. The ribbon trembled slightly in the wind, thin as thread but heavy with meaning. Behind me, the Start House stood proud, a 2-story frame of clean lines and warm wood wrapped in climbing ivy and sunlight. Its foundation had once been rot and silence. Now it held laughter, fresh paint, and futures. I tightened my grip on the ceremonial scissors. The crowd was quiet, respectful. Government officials lined the back. The local press held their lenses steady. And beside me, the first resident, a young mother with a child clinging to her leg, wiped her cheek with the sleeve of her coat. "Ready?" I asked. She nodded. Her hand was trembling too. Together, we cut the ribbon. Soft applause broke out, not loud, but full. Camille stood to the side, her hands clapping slowly, eyes shining. Nate gave me a grin from beneath his baseball cap, the same one he wore the first day we met again. Behind them, Jason stood near a tree, his arms crossed tight, expression unreadable. He didn't wave. I didn't either. A reporter stepped forward, microphone extended. "Ms. Harper, what does justice feel like?" I glanced around at the people gathered, at the little girl tugging her mother's sleeve, at the house that had once only lived in a drawing, now holding real lives. "It's quiet," I said, "but real." The wind kicked up gently, ruffling the edges of my speech. I didn't need it. I stepped to the podium and looked out at the crowd. "My name is Ellis Harper," I began, "and I was given a shed, rotting walls, broken windows, a key that felt more like a warning than a welcome. But I wasn't just reclaiming land. I was reclaiming something deeper. Something they tried to convince me I never had." I paused. Myself. A murmur of acknowledgement moved through the crowd like a wave of understanding. Camille pressed her hand to her chest. Even Jason lowered his gaze. Behind me, a city official read the court's final declaration into the mic. As of June 18th, 2024, the parcel known as Lot 4B, including the structure presently named Start House, is the legal property of Ellis Harper, inherited through confirmed familial succession and reversed deed of fraud. There it was, not a roar, just truth, spoken plainly. A tug on my coat. I looked down. A boy, maybe 7, holding a small sapling in his hands. "Can I plant this here?" he asked. I knelt beside him, looked him in the eye. "Yes," I said. "Everything grows here." And this time the applause came not for me, but for what we built, together. They once gave me a rotting shed and called it my share. They stood under lights and applause, saying dreams were for those who obeyed. And me? I got a rusted key and a condescending smile. I didn't scream. I didn't crash their party or beg for acknowledgement. Instead, I bent down and started digging. I unearthed what they tried to bury, each page, each faded ink stroke of my mother's handwriting, the only woman who ever saw me not as a burden, but as an unfinished promise. I began again with the land they deemed worthless. I called it the Start House, but really it was the end of silence and the beginning of defiance. I laid each brick not for revenge through destruction, but for the quiet kind. The kind they'd have to watch rise day by day, right next to the monument of their arrogance. Then, of course, they struck back. With talk shows and cameras, mental health rumors, and polished lies dressed as concern. They paraded my past across television screens and called me unstable, called me delusional. I broke. For a moment, I really did. I cried alone in my apartment, staring at walls built from other people's judgments. But then I saw her words, my mother's, tilted and uneven on yellowed paper. "I gave you life. Don't let them take your spirit." I didn't answer them with a roar. I answered them with documents, with court filings, with cold facts and warm truth. I brought to light what they had kept in the dark for decades, and I watched as their mansion, once a symbol of control, began to tremble, its foundation eaten away by truth. Sloane once mocked me from velvet-lined walls. Now she stood in a hollowed-out hall whispering, "What are you trying to do to us?" And I simply said, "Exactly what you did to me. Except this time, with receipts. The court said my name. The judge declared the land mine. The press spread the headlines. Jason looked away. Camille's eyes welled with tears. I cut the ribbon. I handed the first key of the Start House to a single mother, a woman who used to wait outside a church for a free box of formula. I didn't win by making them suffer like they made me. I won by standing in the truth they never thought I'd find. Justice didn't come with applause, but it came, finally. And when it didn't ask for permission. Ellis Harper didn't destroy her family's empire with rage. She dismantled it by exposing what was already rotting beneath and letting the truth speak louder than their well-dressed lies. When truth is no longer hidden, it does not need to shout. It only needs to stand. Her story is a reminder that strength isn't measured by how loudly you scream, but by how firmly you refuse to stay silent. Justice may not arrive when it's called. It may not bring a crowd, but it arrives. For those who keep walking through the mud when others tell them to bow their heads. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but it resonates powerfully once it's heard. There will always be rooms where you're shut out for not fitting the mold. But there will also be doors. Doors you can rebuild, reopen, and leave unlocked for others who were told they didn't belong. Because no wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If you've stayed until this point, thank you. Thank you for listening, for witnessing, for making space for a story that, for years, no one wanted to hear. Because this wasn't just about land, or property lines, or who had the bigger house. It was about the quiet ways people rewrite your worth when you're too tired, or too loyal to fight back. They called me dramatic, unstable, ungrateful. They dressed their lies in silk tablecloths and holiday speeches, while I packed my truth into manila folders and waited for the right room. And when that room finally arrived, I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I laid down facts, dates, signatures, and I let the law do what it was built to do. Correct what should have never been allowed in the first place. So if you're watching this, and you've been written out of your own story, if you've been told to settle, to stay quiet, to let it go for the sake of keeping peace, let me say this as clearly as I can. You are not difficult for wanting what's rightfully yours. You are not selfish for wanting space, respect, and acknowledgement. You are not dramatic for finally saying, enough. Some of us don't get apologies. Some of us don't get closure. Some of us get court dates, deed transfers, and the quiet satisfaction of watching people choke on the story they tried to write for you. I'm not here to tell you it's easy, or quick, or clean, but it is possible. I got my house back, not just the one built from timber and nails, but the one built from boundaries, from proof, from knowing that silence may feel like safety. But sometimes, speaking, even once, is the thing that changes everything. So if you've ever been the forgotten daughter, the invisible sibling, the burden they whispered about behind closed doors, know this. You don't have to burn their empire to the ground. You just have to stand still long enough for the truth to do it for you. And when that happens, when the cracks start to show, when their voices shake at the edges, when their lies start unraveling faster than they can patch them, breathe, stay steady, and remember, justice doesn't always come with applause, but when it comes, it's enough.